The Deceiver of Umu Village. In the heart of Umu Village, a small serene settlement surrounded by lush forests and rolling hills, a man named Pastor Chijioke arrived, claiming to bring the word of God and salvation to its people. He was a charismatic figure, tall and imposing, with a deep voice that seemed to echo through the village with divine authority. His arrival was met with excitement and hope, as the villagers had long yearned for spiritual guidance. Pastor Chijioke quickly won the trust of the villagers with his promises of miracles and healing. He would hold late-night prayer meetings in his modest church, where he would pray fervently, his hands raised to the heavens, claiming to communicate directly with God. He spoke of visions and revelations, describing in detail the pain and suffering of the villagers, even things that no one else could have known. People believed he was truly blessed. But behind closed doors, Pastor Chijioke was far from the man he portrayed himself to be. He saw the women of Umu Village not as spiritual beings in need of salvation, but as pawns in his game of power and control. Using his position of trust, he began to manipulate vulnerable women, promising them divine blessings in exchange for their loyalty, money, and in some cases their bodies. One by one, the women of the village began to fall prey to his false promises. He would tell them that God had chosen them to receive special anointings, and that to truly receive his blessing, they needed to give him personal gifts, or even large sums of money. Pastor Chijioke claimed that their financial offerings would protect them from evil spirits, or ensure prosperity for their families. Desperate for change, many women, mothers, wives, daughters, handed over what little they had, believing they were doing God's work. The pastor's influence grew stronger as he isolated his victims from their families and communities, convincing them that only through him could they truly experience salvation. Some women were coerced into private prayer sessions, where he manipulated them into performing acts of intimacy under the guise of spiritual cleansing. Those who resisted were told they were cursed and would never be blessed by God. As the years passed, Pastor Chijioke's power in Umu Village deepened. He became untouchable, feared and revered by all. The women who had been taken advantage of kept their suffering in silence, ashamed of what had happened and too afraid to speak out. The few who dared question him were quickly silenced by threats of spiritual ruin or worse, public humiliation. But, as with all lies, the truth has a way of revealing itself. One day, a woman named Nkechi, who had been secretly helping the pastor's victims, discovered a journal hidden in the pastor's study. The journal was filled with entries detailing his manipulative tactics, his plans to acquire more wealth and power, and his cruel treatment of the women who trusted him. Nkechi, with the help of a few brave villagers, gathered evidence of Pastor Chijioke's deception and exposed his wrongdoings. Word spread like wildfire through the village. The women who had been exploited, some of them now broken by years of manipulation, finally found their voices. The community came together, demanding justice. Pastor Chijioke was confronted by the villagers, who were no longer blinded by his false promises. He was forced to confess his sins, and though some believed his manipulations were part of a larger, evil plan, others saw it as a personal betrayal of faith. The pastor was driven out of the village, never to return. But the damage he had done lingered. Many of the women who had fallen under his spell struggled to rebuild their lives and heal from the trauma. Still, the village of Umu found strength in unity and slowly began to recover from the deceit that had poisoned their faith. Nkechi, the woman who had dared to speak out, became a symbol of hope and resilience. She helped the women heal through counseling, and together, they rebuilt a new true sense of community centered on compassion, integrity, and love. In the years that followed, Umu Village prospered, but they never forgot the lessons they learned, that true faith requires honesty, that power should never be abused, and that no one, no matter how charismatic or seemingly divine, should ever be allowed to manipulate others for personal gain. As the years passed after Pastor Chijioke's disgraceful departure, Umu Village slowly began to rebuild, but the scars of his manipulation still ran deep. Many of the women who had been exploited found it difficult to trust again, not just in men but in anyone who carried a position of authority. The village, once full of unity and faith, now bore the weight of skepticism and fear. However, among the shadows of that sorrow, hope began to take root. Nkechi, the brave woman who had exposed the pastor's wrongdoings, took it upon herself to help the women find healing. She formed a support group for those affected, where they could share their stories and lean on each other for strength. Slowly, but surely, the group began to grow, and more women came forward, no longer hiding in silence. They began to open up about their experiences, each one's voice strengthening the others. But even as the women of Umu Village found strength in each other, a sense of dread lingered. Though Pastor Chijioke had been exiled, his presence was never truly gone. Whispers of his return began to circulate, and with them, a creeping unease that he might try to reclaim his power. Nkechi, now a respected leader in the community, refused to let fear dictate their future. She knew that for Umu Village to truly heal, they needed to confront the past fully and put the evil that Chijioke represented to rest once and for all. With the support of the women's group, she began organizing gatherings where they would talk openly about faith, healing, and the power of self-worth. These meetings grew in attendance, attracting both men and women from the village who had also been victims of manipulation, whether directly or through their loved ones. One evening, as the village prepared for a community gathering, a visitor arrived. A man dressed in fine clothes, with a well-groomed beard and a commanding presence, appeared at the village gates. His name was Pastor Ifeanyi, and he had heard rumors of the village's rise from the ashes, led by Nkechi. He introduced himself as a pastor who had come to spread a message of true spirituality and healing, offering his services to help guide them after the turmoil they had faced. Nkechi, skeptical but always open-minded, agreed to meet him, understanding that the people of the village deserved to hear a true message of faith, one grounded in compassion and integrity. Pastor Ifeanyi, unlike Pastor Chijioke, spoke of love, acceptance, and community support, drawing no attention to himself but focusing on the well-being of the people. However, a lingering question gnawed at the back of Nkechi's mind. Could he be the one to help rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or was he simply another in a long line of men who sought to manipulate the vulnerable? The first meeting Pastor Ifeanyi held with the villagers was unlike any of the meetings they'd had with Pastor Chijioke. There were no grand promises of miracles or supernatural revelations. Instead, he spoke humbly, sharing stories from his own life about overcoming hardship and finding strength through love and kindness. He encouraged the villagers to take responsibility for their own lives and to help one another, emphasizing that the true power of faith came not from blind devotion, but from living in harmony and compassion. Though Pastor Ifeanyi's message seemed genuine, Nkechi could not shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. She decided to keep a close watch on him, just as she had done when Pastor Chijioke first arrived. Weeks passed, and the village seemed to be recovering. More women were attending the support group, speaking openly about their experiences and finding healing. Pastor Ifeanyi continued to lead the community, offering support and wisdom, and for a time, his presence seemed to be a balm to the wounded hearts of Umu Village. Then, one fateful evening, after the sun had set and the village had gathered for a prayer meeting, something unsettling happened. As the villagers were deep in prayer, Nkechi overheard a conversation between Pastor Ifeanyi and a young woman named Ada, a recent widow who had lost her husband to a tragic accident. The conversation at first seemed innocent, Pastor Ifeanyi offering her guidance and comforting her in her grief. But the longer she listened, the more she realized that his tone had shifted, growing more intimate. "You know, Ada," he said softly, "you've been through so much, but you have such beauty in your spirit. God has a special plan for you, and sometimes that plan requires sacrifices, but you must trust in the process. Nkechi's heart sank. She had heard those words before, spoken by another man in the same village, but it was a different time and a different face. Pastor Ifeanyi was treading dangerous waters, and Nkechi knew she had to act fast. The next day, she gathered the women of the support group and shared her suspicions. Together, they decided to confront.